I woke up at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of metal snipping through the quiet Minnesota winter air. And when I looked out my bedroom window, I saw Brenda Patterson crouched next to my truck with a pair of industrial bolt cutters in her gloved hands. My name is Yuri Ivanov, and I had lived in the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association community in Bloomington, Minnesota, for exactly 8 months. 8 months of increasingly ridiculous complaints, fines, and power trips from our HOA president, Brenda Patterson. She was everything you would expect from the stereotype. Mid-50s, helmet hair dyed an unnatural shade of blonde, always wearing those chunky jewelry pieces that looked like they came from a home shopping network, and a permanent expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. But this morning, she had crossed a line that I never thought anyone would be stupid enough to cross. I threw on my winter coat over my pajamas and shoved my feet into my boots without bothering to tie them. The temperature outside had dropped to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, with a wind chill that made it feel like negative 30. This was exactly why I had installed a block heater on my 2019 Ford F-150 when I moved here from Seattle. The block heater kept the engine warm overnight, so the truck would actually start in these brutal conditions. By the time I got outside, Brenda was already walking back toward her own driveway, the orange extension cord that had been plugged into my block heater now severed and dangling uselessly from the outlet on the side of my garage. She turned when she heard my boots crunching on the frozen snow. "Good morning, Yuri," she said with that fake sweetness she always used when she thought she was in the right. "I trust you received my email last night about the violation." "What violation?" I demanded, my breath creating clouds in the frigid air. "And did you just cut my block heater cord?" She held up the bolt cutters like they were evidence in her favor. Section 12, subsection 4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no extension cords are permitted to be visible from the street. I sent you a warning at 11 p.m. last night with a deadline of 6 a.m. this morning to remedy the situation. Since you failed to comply, I took corrective action, as is my right as HOA president. I stared at her in disbelief. "You sent an email at 11 at night and expected me to see it before 6 in the morning. In the middle of winter. That cord powers my block heater, Brenda. Without it, my truck might not start. Then I suggest you find a solution that complies with HOA regulations," she said primly. "The rules exist for a reason. They maintain our property values and community standards. You committed vandalism," I said, feeling my anger rising. "You destroyed my property." "I enforced community standards," she corrected. "If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to bring it up at the next HOA board meeting. That's 3 weeks from now. In the meantime, I'll be sending you an invoice for my time spent correcting this violation. Have a good day." She turned and walked back toward her house, which was directly across the street from mine. I looked down at my severed extension cord, then at my truck. The block heater had been running all night until she cut the power, but that had been at least 15 or 20 minutes ago. In this cold, the engine block would be losing heat fast. I went back inside and checked my email on my phone. Sure enough, there was a message from Brenda sent at 11:04 p.m. with the subject line, "Urgent Violation Notice." I had been asleep, like any normal person would be at that hour. The email contained a grainy photo of my orange extension cord running from my garage outlet to my truck, along with several paragraphs citing various HOA bylaws and threatening fines of $50 per day if I did not remedy the situation immediately. This was not the first issue I had dealt with regarding Brenda and the HOA. When I first moved in during May, she had cited me for having my garbage cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. Never mind that it was the day before collection, and I had put them out at 7 p.m. instead of waiting until after dark like the rules apparently required. Then there was the incident where she measured my grass and determined it was 3.2 inches tall instead of the mandated maximum of 3 inches. I had received a violation notice and a $50 fine for that. There had been complaints about my truck being parked in my driveway instead of my garage, complaints about a small garden gnome my sister had given me as a housewarming present, and complaints about the color of my window curtains being visible from the outside. Each time, I had either paid the fine or corrected whatever minor infraction she had invented. But this was different. This was destruction of property, and it was dangerous. Block heaters were not just a convenience in Minnesota winters, they were practically a necessity. Without one, engine oil became thick and sluggish, batteries lost power in the extreme cold, and engines could suffer serious damage from cold starts. I got dressed properly and went back outside to assess the damage. The extension cord was a heavy-duty outdoor model that I had paid $60 for at the hardware store. Brenda had cut it about 3 feet from the plug end, leaving the rest of it connected to my truck's block heater. I could potentially splice it back together or get a new cord, but that was not the point. The point was that she had no right to destroy my property. I tried starting my truck. The engine turned over sluggishly, struggling in the extreme cold. After 3 attempts, it finally caught and started, running rough for the first minute before settling into a proper idle. I let it run for a while to warm up, grateful that it had started at all. Some of my neighbors had not been so lucky in the past. During the previous cold snap in January, I had helped jumpstart 3 different vehicles on our street. My phone rang while I was standing in my driveway. It was my girlfriend, Claire Garrison. She lived in St. Paul, about 30 minutes away when traffic was good. "Hey," I answered. "You're up early." "I have that deposition at 8, she said. Claire was a paralegal at a law firm downtown, but I wanted to call before I got into the office. "Did you see the news about the cold advisory? They are saying it might hit -25 tonight." "Yeah, I saw it." "Actually, I have a problem related to that." I explained what had happened with Brenda and my block heater cord. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Claire said in a very controlled voice, "She did what? Cut my block heater cord with bolt cutters, at like 5:20 this morning." "Yuri, that's destruction of property. That's a crime." "I know," I said. "But what am I supposed to do? Call the police? They will think it is a neighborhood dispute and tell us to work it out ourselves." "Not if you frame it correctly," Claire said. "She destroyed something that costs money to replace. That's criminal damage to property. In Minnesota, that's a misdemeanor at minimum. And given that it's cold enough that not having a working block heater could strand you or cause engine damage, there might be an argument for it being reckless endangerment." "You really think I should call the police?" "I think you should at least file a report," Claire said. "Create a paper trail. This woman has been harassing you for months. At some point, you need to push back or she will just keep escalating." She had a point. I told her I would think about it and let her go so she could get ready for work. I stood in my driveway for a few more minutes, watching my truck idle and letting the heater warm the cab. Across the street, I could see lights on in Brenda's house. Her car, a silver 2020 Lexus SUV, was parked in her driveway as always. She never used her garage. It was too full of junk. I noticed something interesting. There was no cord running from Brenda's house to her car. Either she did not use a block heater, or she had some kind of internal garage setup that I could not see. But her car was outside, and unless she had an engine block made of magic, it was going to have the same problems as any other vehicle in this weather. An idea started forming in my mind. It was petty, maybe even childish, but after 8 months of Brenda's constant harassment, I felt entitled to a little petness. I went back inside, made myself breakfast, and got ready for work. I worked as a software engineer for a medical device company in Eden Prairie, and thankfully, my employer was reasonable about weather-related delays. I sent a message to my team lead letting him know I would be starting from home this morning due to vehicle issues and would come in later if needed. Around 8 a.m., I heard a car engine struggling to turn over. I looked out my window and saw Brenda in her Lexus, trying to start it. The engine made that distinctive slow, labored sound of a cold-soaked battery trying to crank a cold engine. After several attempts, the sound stopped. A minute later, Brenda got out of her car and slammed the door hard enough that I could hear it from inside my house. She looked around the neighborhood, presumably looking for someone to help her. Our street had about 12 houses on it, and most of the residents had already left for work. The Johnsons next door to me were retired, and usually did not go out on extremely cold days. The Martinez family on the other side had 3 kids, and were probably in the midst of the school morning chaos. That left me as the most obvious source of help. Since my truck was still running in my driveway and I was clearly home, I watched as Brenda looked at my house, then at my truck, then back at her car. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She needed help, but she had just destroyed my property less than 3 hours ago. I wondered if she had enough self-awareness to recognize the irony of the situation. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I did not recognize, but the message made the sender clear. "This is Brenda Patterson. My car won't start. I need to get to an important meeting. Can you give me a jump?" I stared at the message for a long moment. The mature, responsible thing to do would be to help her. It was dangerously cold outside, and leaving someone stranded in these conditions was not just petty, it could be dangerous. But at the same time, she had deliberately sabotaged my vehicle's cold weather protection system and shown absolutely no remorse for it. She had justified it with bureaucratic nonsense about HOA rules and had even threatened to bill me for her time. I typed back, "Sorry, I'm busy with work. Maybe call roadside assistance." I put my phone down and went to my home office to actually do some work. I could occasionally hear Brenda's car attempting to start again over the next hour, each attempt sounding weaker than the last. She was going to kill her battery completely if she kept that up. Around 9:30, there was a sharp knock on my front door. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Brenda stood on my porch, wrapped in a long wool coat, her face pinched and red from the cold. I opened the door but did not invite her in. "Yes, Yuri, I need your help," she said, and I could tell it physically pained her to ask. "My car won't start, and I have an important HOA board meeting at the city planning office at 10. I just need a quick jump. It will take 5 minutes. Did you try roadside assistance?" I asked. "Your insurance probably covers that." "They said it would be 2 to 3 hours because of call volume," she said, irritation creeping into her voice. "Everyone's car is having problems today because of the cold. I just need a jump. You have jumper cables, don't you?" "I do," I confirmed. "But I'm really busy with work this morning. I have a critical project deadline." Her face began turning a deeper shade of red. "Are you seriously refusing to help me? It will take 5 minutes. Like I said, I'm busy. I'm sure someone else on the street can help. Have you tried the Johnsons? They don't answer their door," she said. "Please, Yuri, I'm asking nicely." "Were you asking nicely when you cut my block heater cord at 5:30 this morning?" The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately saw her expression change from pleading to defensive. "That was completely different," she snapped. That was an HOA matter. This is an emergency. It's an emergency that could have been avoided if you hadn't vandalized my property, I said. You know what a block heater does, right? It keeps the engine warm so the car actually starts in cold weather, kind of like what you need right now. I enforced a community rule, she said, her voice rising. You were in violation. I gave you notice. You sent an email at 11 p.m. and expected compliance by 6 a.m. That's not reasonable notice, Brenda, and cutting someone's property with bolt cutters is vandalism, not enforcement. I will have you cited for non-compliance with neighborhood assistance expectations, she threatened. That's not a real thing, I said. And even if it were, good luck explaining to the HOA board why you think you are entitled to help from someone whose property you destroyed this morning. You are being completely unreasonable. No, I'm being exactly as reasonable as you were this morning. You made your bed, Brenda. Now you get to lie in it, or in this case, sit in your cold car and wait for roadside assistance. I closed the door before she could respond. My heart was pounding, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Part of me knew I was being petty, but another part of me felt completely justified. She had shown zero consideration for me or my property, had destroyed something I needed for basic vehicle operation in winter, and had done so with an attitude of smug superiority. Why should I drop everything to help her when she would not even apologize? I went back to my office and tried to focus on work, but I kept getting distracted by the situation. About 20 minutes later, I heard a vehicle pull up outside. I looked out the window and saw a tow truck from a local service station. Brenda must have called them directly instead of waiting for her insurance roadside assistance. The driver, a young guy in his 20s wearing a thick work jacket, got out and talked to Brenda for a few minutes. Then he pulled out a portable jump starter and popped her hood. 5 minutes later, Brenda's Lexus roared to life. She got in without even thanking the tow truck driver properly and backed out of her driveway fast enough to leave skid marks in the frost. The tow truck driver shook his head and got back in his vehicle, leaving shortly after. I figured that was the end of it for the day, but I was wrong. Around noon, I got an email from the HOA board. It was not just from Brenda but from all 5 board members, which meant she had looped them all in. The subject line was Notice of Emergency Board Meeting and Fines. The email informed me that an emergency board meeting had been convened to discuss my flagrant violations of community standards and refusal to provide reasonable assistance to fellow homeowners in emergency situations. I was being fined $250 for the extension cord violation, another $100 for failure to maintain community spirit, and was being issued a formal warning that further violations could result in legal action up to and including foreclosure on my property through HOA liens. I read the email 3 times to make sure I was not misunderstanding it. They were threatening to foreclose on my house because I would not jump-start Brenda's car after she had vandalized my property. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I called Claire during my lunch break and read her the email. "Okay, that's it," she said. "You need to talk to a lawyer, like today. Isn't that a bit extreme, Yuri? They are threatening foreclosure. That's not a joke." HOAs in Minnesota do have the legal authority to place liens on properties and eventually foreclose if fees and fines go unpaid. They are supposed to follow a very specific legal process, and what they are doing right now smells like harassment and abuse of power, but you need actual legal representation to fight this. You know anyone who handles HOA disputes? Let me make some calls, Claire said. I'll text you some names. In the meantime, do not pay any of those fines and do not respond to that email until you have talked to a lawyer. Also, I think you really should file a police report about the cord cutting. You need documentation that she destroyed your property. After I hung up with Claire, I spent some time researching HOA laws in Minnesota. What I found was both enlightening and disturbing. HOAs did indeed have significant power, but that power was not unlimited. They had to follow their own bylaws, provide reasonable notice for violations, and could not impose fines that were not specified in the governing documents. They also could not discriminate, harass, or abuse their authority for personal vendettas. The problem was that fighting an HOA required time, money, and legal expertise. Many homeowners just paid the fines because it was easier than fighting, which was exactly what people like Brenda counted on. Claire texted me the name of an attorney named Robert Chen who specialized in HOA disputes and property law. I called his office and managed to get an appointment for later that afternoon at 4 p.m. I told my work that I needed to leave early for a personal emergency, which was true enough. Before I left for the appointment, I went outside to photograph the cut extension cord and document the damage. I took pictures from multiple angles, showing the clean cut that could only have been made with a tool like bolt cutters, not from wear and tear or an accident. I also took screenshots of the timestamp on Brenda's 11 p.m. email and the 6 a.m. deadline she had imposed. The law office was in a professional building in downtown Minneapolis. Robert Chen turned out to be a man in his early 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a well-organized office. I spent an hour walking him through everything. The 8 months of escalating harassment, the numerous petty fines and violations, this morning's cord cutting, and the threatening email from the HOA board. He took notes and asked detailed questions, particularly about the HOA's governing documents and bylaws. I had copies of everything from when I closed on the house, and I emailed them to him from my phone while we talked. "Okay," he said after reviewing everything. "Here's the situation. The HOA is almost certainly overstepping their authority, but we need to be strategic about how we handle this. First, the cord cutting. That's criminal destruction of property. I recommend you file a police report today. Not tomorrow, today. The longer you wait, the less seriously it will be taken." "Will the police actually do anything?" I asked. "Maybe, maybe not," Robert said honestly. "But the point is to create an official record. If this escalates, we want documentation showing a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority. Second, these fines they are trying to impose. The extension cord fine might be technically allowed under a strict reading of their bylaws, but the timing and notice were completely unreasonable. The failure to maintain community spirit fine is complete nonsense. That's not in any HOA bylaws I have ever seen, and you cannot fine people for not being friendly. What about the foreclosure threat? That's where they really stepped in it," Robert said with a slight smile. HOAs can pursue foreclosure, but only after following a very specific legal process that includes multiple written notices, opportunities to cure, and usually a minimum threshold of unpaid fines. They cannot just threaten foreclosure in an email over a few $100s. That's intimidation, and it might actually give us grounds for a harassment lawsuit. What do you recommend I do? File the police report today. Do not pay any of the fines. I'll draft a response to the HOA board on your behalf, informing them that you are represented by counsel and that any further communications should go through me. I'll also request copies of all complaints filed against you, all board meeting minutes discussing your property, and documentation of how similar violations by other homeowners have been handled. If they have been selectively enforcing rules against you, that's discrimination. What will this cost me? I asked, because I had to know. My retainer is $1,500, which covers the initial work I just described. If this goes to litigation, costs will increase, but honestly, I don't think it will get that far. In my experience, HOA boards like this back down quickly once they realize the homeowner has legal representation and is willing to fight back. They are used to people just rolling over. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds before agreeing. $1,500 was a lot of money, but it was worth it to not be harassed in my own home. I signed the retainer agreement and gave Robert permission to start working on my behalf. By the time I left his office, it was nearly 5:30 and fully dark outside. The temperature had dropped even further, now sitting at -20 according to my car's thermometer. I stopped at a police station on my way home and filed a report about the cord cutting. The officer who took my report was a middle-aged woman named Officer Stevens who seemed sympathetic, but not particularly optimistic about prosecution. "Technically, this is criminal damage to property," she said as she typed up my report. "But the dollar amount is low enough that it's a misdemeanor, and the prosecutor's office is pretty backed up. They might not pursue charges unless the property owner really pushes for it." "I'm not necessarily looking for criminal charges," I said. "I just want documentation that this happened." "Smart," she said approvingly. "You having problems with this HOA lady? You have no idea." "I live in an HOA neighborhood too," Officer Stevens said. "Different one than yours, over in Edna. Our president tried to fine me for parking my squad car in my driveway. Said it violated the aesthetic standards of the community. I had to get the department's legal office involved. Some of these people act like they are running a dictatorship instead of a homeowners association." She finished the report and gave me a case number. "If you need this for court or anything, just reference that number. And good luck with your HOA. Sounds like you are going to need it." I drove home carefully on the icy roads. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that Brenda's car was back in her driveway and her lights were on. I wondered if she had been watching for me to get home. I would not have put it past her. I was inside for maybe 10 minutes when my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a man I did not recognize. He was in his 60s, wearing an expensive-looking coat and holding a folder. I opened the door with the chain still attached. "Can I help you?" "Yuri Ivanov," the man asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Donald Fraser. I'm on the HOA board. I'm the treasurer. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I considered closing the door, but something in his demeanor seemed different from Brenda's aggressive approach. He seemed almost apologetic. I closed the door, undid the chain, and let him in. Donald Fraser stepped into my entryway and got straight to the point. "I want to apologize for the email you received today. I didn't know about most of what was in it until after Brenda sent it out." "She sent it from the whole board," I pointed out. "She has access to the board email account," Donald said with clear frustration. "Technically, we are supposed to vote on any official communications, but Brenda has a habit of taking unilateral action and claiming it's board approved. Several of us only found out about this afternoon's email after it had already gone out. So the fines aren't legitimate. The extension cord fine might have some basis in the bylaws, but the amount is excessive, and the notice was completely inadequate. As for the community spirit fine, that's pure fiction. There's no such thing in our governing documents, and the foreclosure threat was completely out of line. I've been on this board for 6 years, and we have never, ever foreclosed on a property. That's a last resort after years of non-payment, not a first response to a minor dispute." I studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of Brenda making our entire HOA look bad," Donald said bluntly. "She became president 2 years ago, and since then, We've had 3 families move out specifically because of conflicts with her. We've had 2 other homeowners threaten legal action. Our insurance premiums have gone up because of liability concerns. And now I hear she cut your block heater cord with bolt cutters this morning. You heard about that. The whole street heard about it, Donald said. Betty Johnson from next door called me this afternoon. She saw the whole thing from her window. She said Brenda was out there at 5:30 in the morning with bolt cutters, and then you two had words in your driveway. She violated the HOA rules by cutting my cord, I said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. She committed vandalism, Donald said firmly. I don't care what the bylaws say about extension cords. You don't destroy someone's property. That's not enforcement. That's a crime. I filed a police report this afternoon, I said. Donald nodded approvingly. Good, you should. Look, I'm not asking you to drop this or to pay those bogus fines. What I'm asking is that you give me and the other reasonable board members a chance to fix this before it becomes a legal nightmare for everyone involved. What did you have in mind? There's a regular board meeting next Tuesday night, Donald said. I'm calling for a special vote to remove Brenda as president and to nullify any fines or penalties she's issued without proper board approval. I already have 2 other board members on board with this. That's 3 out of 5, which is enough for a vote of no confidence. And you think this will work? I think Brenda has finally gone too far and the rest of us are done covering for her, Donald said. But I need you to agree not to pursue legal action against the HOA as an entity until after this meeting. If we can remove her and fix this internally, it saves everyone time and money. If we can't, then you do whatever you need to do, and I'll personally testify on your behalf about how she's been abusing her authority. It was a tempting offer, but I had learned not to trust HOA board promises. I'm going to need that offer in writing. Fair enough. Donald pulled out his phone. Give me your email. I'll send you a formal letter tonight, signed by me and the 2 other board members who are supporting this action. We'll commit to holding the vote, removing Brenda if the vote passes and nullifying the fines. We'll also agree to revise the bylaws to prevent this kind of abuse going forward. I gave him my email address. What happens if the vote fails? Then Brenda stays president, and you sue the HOA with my blessing, Donald said, but I don't think the vote will fail. Margaret Anderson and Steve Kim are both fed up with her. Margaret actually resigned from the board last month because of Brenda, but she agreed to come back for this one vote if it means getting rid of her. After Donald left, I called Claire and updated her on everything. She was skeptical about trusting the HOA board, but agreed that it was worth waiting until Tuesday to see what happened. Just make sure your lawyer is ready to file suit if this doesn't work out, she said. And don't let them pressure you into dropping the police report. That stays regardless of what the board does. The next few days were tense. Brenda sent me 2 more emails threatening additional fines for various invented violations. Robert Chen responded to both on my behalf with polite but firm letters informing her that I was represented by counsel and that any further harassment would result in legal action. She stopped emailing after the second response. True to his word, Donald Fraser sent me a formal letter that night, co-signed by Margaret Anderson and Steve Kim. It laid out exactly what he had promised: a vote of no confidence in Brenda's presidency, nullification of the recent fines, and a commitment to bylaws reform. The letter also included an apology for the HOA's actions and an acknowledgement that the cord cutting constituted criminal vandalism. I forwarded the letter to Robert Chen, who said it was a good sign, but advised me to still prepare for litigation just in case. He started drafting a formal lawsuit against both Brenda personally and the HOA as an entity, just to have it ready if needed. On Saturday, I went to the hardware store and bought a new extension cord, along with a locking cord cover that would prevent anyone from unplugging or cutting it easily. I also installed a camera in my garage window that gave me a clear view of my driveway and truck. If Brenda tried anything else, I would have video evidence. Claire came over that evening, and we made dinner together while I vented about the whole situation. She had brought a bottle of wine, and we sat on my couch talking until late. "You know what's crazy?" I said. "I actually liked this neighborhood when I first moved in. The house is great, the location is perfect for my commute, and most of the neighbors are nice. It's just Brenda who makes everything miserable." "That's the problem with HOAs," Claire said. "They are only as good as the people running them. Give someone like Brenda a little bit of authority and she turns into a tyrant. It's like she gets off on controlling people." "Donald Fraser seems reasonable," I offered. "Donald Fraser enabled her for 2 years," Claire countered. "He might be reasonable now, but where was he when she was harassing all those other families? Where was he when she was issuing bogus fines left and right? He's only stepping up now because it's gotten so bad that it's affecting the HOA's liability insurance." She had a point. I appreciated that Donald was trying to fix things, but Claire was right that he shared some responsibility for letting Brenda run wild for so long. Monday came and went without incident. I worked from home again because my employer had implemented a cold weather policy allowing remote work when temperatures dropped below -20. Brenda's car was in her driveway all day, and I saw her leave once around lunchtime, her car now apparently starting fine. She did not look in my direction as she drove past. Tuesday evening arrived, and with it came the HOA board meeting. It was being held at the community clubhouse, a small building at the entrance to our neighborhood that was used for HOA meetings and occasional community events. I was not required to attend, but Donald had sent me a text suggesting I might want to be there in case questions came up. I arrived at 6:55 for the 7 p.m. meeting. The clubhouse was a single large room with folding chairs set up in rows facing a table where the board members would sit. About 15 other homeowners were already there, which was apparently a huge turnout. Donald had mentioned that most meetings only drew 3 or 4 people. Brenda was at the front table, arranging papers and generally acting like she owned the place. She saw me come in, and her expression turned sour. Donald, Margaret, and Steve were also at the table, along with the 5th board member, a woman named Patricia Gomez, who I had only met once during my HOA orientation when I moved in. The meeting started promptly at 7. Brenda called it to order and began with her standard president's report, which apparently consisted of her listing all the violations she had identified in the neighborhood over the past month. I was mentioned twice, once for the extension cord and once for allegedly having my garbage cans out 15 minutes past the allowed time last Thursday. I had not even been home last Thursday. I had been at Claire's place in St. Paul. After Brenda's report, Donald asked for the floor. "I'm calling for an unscheduled vote," he announced. "I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in Brenda Patterson's role as HOA president, effective immediately." The room went completely silent. Brenda's face turned bright red. "You can't do that in the middle of a meeting without notice." "Actually, I can," Donald said calmly. "Section 18 of our bylaws allows any board member to call for a vote of no confidence at any regular meeting. This is a regular meeting." Steve seconds the motion. "I second," Steve Kim confirmed. "This is outrageous," Brenda sputtered. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you have been abusing your authority as president, selectively enforcing rules, harassing homeowners, and exposing this HOA to legal liability, Margaret Anderson said. The cord-cutting incident was the last straw, Brenda. You committed vandalism. You could have been arrested. I enforce the rules, Brenda shouted. You destroyed someone's property with bolt cutters at 5:30 in the morning, Donald said. That's not enforcement, that's a crime, and you've been escalating these kinds of actions for months. We've had multiple complaints from homeowners. We've had families move out. Our insurance premiums have doubled. This has to stop. I want to say something, I said, standing up from my seat. All eyes turned to me. I moved here 8 months ago, and in that time, Brenda has issued me over a dozen violation notices and fines. Some of them were legitimate, like when my grass was too tall. I paid that fine, but most of them have been completely ridiculous. She fined me for having the wrong color curtains. She fined me for parking my truck in my own driveway. And last week, she sent me an email at 11 p.m. demanding I fix a supposed violation by 6 a.m., then used that as an excuse to cut my block heater cord with bolt cutters. I pulled out my phone and held up the photos of the cut cord. This is not HOA enforcement. This is harassment. And when her own car would not start later that morning because of the cold, she expected me to drop everything and help her. When I refused, she sent me an email threatening to foreclose on my house. There were murmurs from the other homeowners in attendance. Several people were nodding in agreement. I have also had issues with Brenda, an older man in the back row said. He stood up. I'm Jim Rodriguez. I live on Oakwood Circle. Last summer, Brenda cited me for having decorative rocks in my garden that were apparently the wrong color. The fine was $150. When I questioned it, she threatened to double the fine. A woman in her 30s raised her hand. I'm Ashley Turner. Brenda sent me a violation notice because my kids left their bikes in the front yard. She called it recreational equipment storage in violation of community standards. They were just bikes. Kids ride bikes, but she wanted to fine me $75. More people started speaking up, each with their own story of Brenda's overreach and petty enforcement. It became clear that I was far from the only person who had been dealing with her behavior. The meeting turned into an impromptu airing of grievances, with person after person describing incidents of harassment, unreasonable fines, and threats. Through it all, Brenda sat at the front table, her face growing redder and her posture more rigid. When the complaints finally died down, she stood up. You're all ungrateful, she said, her voice shaking with anger. I volunteer my time to keep this neighborhood respectable. I maintain property values. I enforce the rules that you all agreed to when you bought your homes. If you don't like it, you can move. We're not the ones who need to leave, Donald said quietly. Brenda, I'm calling the vote. All in favor of removing Brenda Patterson as HOA president, say aye. Aye, said Donald. Aye, said Margaret. Aye, said Steve. Everyone looked at Patricia Gomez, the fifth board member who had not yet spoken. She had been sitting quietly through the whole meeting, and I realized I had no idea which way she would vote. If she voted no, it would be a tie and Brenda would likely remain president. Patricia looked at Brenda, then at the assembled homeowners, then back at the other board members. I'm sorry, Brenda, she said, but this has gone too far. Aye. The motion passes 4-1, Donald said. Brenda Patterson is removed as HOA president effective immediately. As treasurer and senior board member, I'm assuming the role of acting president until we can hold proper elections next month. Brenda stood up so fast her chair fell over. This is illegal. I'll sue all of you. You can't do this. We just did, Margaret said. And if you want to sue, go ahead. But I suggest you talk to a lawyer first. because what we just did is completely within our authority under the HOA bylaws. What you've been doing, on the other hand, is going to be a lot harder to defend." Brenda grabbed her papers, shoved them into her bag, and stormed out of the clubhouse. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then someone in the back started clapping. Soon the whole room was applauding. Donald gavelled the meeting back to order. "Okay, we have actual business to conduct. First item. I move that we nullify all fines issued by Brenda Patterson over the past 6 months, pending review by the full board. We'll look at each case individually and determine which, if any, were legitimate. Anyone who paid a fine that we determine was improper will receive a refund." The motion passed unanimously, including Brenda's empty seat being counted as abstaining rather than opposing. Second item, Donald continued. I move that we issue a formal apology to Yuri Ivanov for the HOA's actions, including the destruction of his property, and that we reimburse him for the cost of replacing his extension cord and any legal fees he's incurred as a result of this situation. That motion also passed unanimously. Donald looked at me. "Yuri, do you have receipts for the cord and your legal consultation?" "I do," I said. "Send them to me. We'll get you reimbursed within the week, and again, on behalf of the board, I apologize. This should never have happened." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering routine business like budget approvals and maintenance schedules. It felt surreal to sit through normal HOA business after the drama of the vote. When the meeting finally adjourned, several homeowners came up to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Brenda. Jim Rodriguez even invited me to a neighborhood barbecue he was planning for the spring. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The nightmare was not completely over since Brenda still lived across the street, but at least she no longer had HOA authority to wield against me. Claire called as I was pulling into my driveway. "How did it go?" "She's out," I said. 4-1 vote. She stormed out of the meeting threatening to sue everyone, but she's done as president. "That's amazing," Claire said. "I'm proud of you for seeing this through. I'm just glad it's over. Donald said they are going to reimburse me for the extension cord and my legal fees." "Make sure you get that in writing," Claire advised. "And keep your lawyer on retainer for at least a few more months, just in case Brenda tries anything else. People like her don't usually go quietly." Claire's warning proved prescient. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "Traitor" in bright red letters across my driveway. The paint was still slightly tacky, which meant it had been done recently, probably in the early morning hours while I was asleep. I immediately checked the camera I had installed in my garage window. Sure enough, the footage showed a figure in dark clothing and a hood approaching my driveway at around 4 a.m. and spray-painting the message. The person had tried to obscure their identity, but there was a moment when they turned toward the camera and the streetlight caught their face clearly. It was Brenda. I downloaded the video file and called Officer Stevens at the police station. She remembered me from my previous report and seemed genuinely angry when I described what had happened. "That's criminal mischief and vandalism," she said. "And since you have video evidence, we can actually do something about this. Can you send me the footage?" I emailed her the video file while we were still on the phone. She watched it and confirmed that it was clear enough to identify Brenda. "I'm going to go have a conversation with Miss Patterson," Officer Stevens said. "This kind of retaliation is not acceptable. You might want to document the damage with photos and get quotes for cleaning or resurfacing your driveway if the paint won't come off." An hour later, I saw a police cruiser pull up to Brenda's house. Officer Stevens and another officer went to the door and spoke with Brenda for about 15 minutes. I could not hear what was being said, but I could see Brenda gesturing animatedly and the officers maintaining calm, professional demeanors. Eventually, Brenda went back inside and the officers returned to their vehicle. Officer Stevens called me a few minutes later. "We informed Miss Patterson that we have video evidence of her vandalizing your property and that charges will be filed." She denied it at first, but when we told her we had clear footage of her face, she changed her story and said she was just expressing her frustration and didn't think it was a big deal. "Is she going to be charged?" "Yes. We're filing charges for criminal mischief and vandalism. Given that she's already been reported for cutting your cord, this establishes a pattern of behavior. The prosecutor's office is more likely to take this seriously. She'll probably get a summons to appear in court." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. "Just doing my job," Officer Stevens said. "But between you and me, people like her need to learn that there are consequences for their actions. She's been acting like being HOA president made her above the law. Time for a reality check." I spent the rest of the morning trying to clean the spray paint off my driveway. Some of it came off with a pressure washer, but the concrete was stained red in places. I got quotes from 3 contractors for resurfacing. The average cost was around $800. I documented everything and sent copies to both Officer Stevens and Robert Chen. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I had not anticipated. Brenda was formally charged with 2 counts of criminal mischief and vandalism. She hired a lawyer and tried to fight the charges, claiming that I had provoked her by refusing to help with her car and by conspiring with the HOA board to remove her from office. The prosecutor was not impressed with her defense. Meanwhile, Robert Chen sent a formal demand letter to Brenda requesting reimbursement for the extension cord, the driveway damage, and my legal fees. The total came to just over $3,000. Brenda refused to pay, so Robert filed a civil lawsuit against her in district court. The HOA board, now under Donald's leadership, launched a full review of Brenda's actions as president. They discovered that she had been issuing fines and violations that were never properly documented or voted on by the board. She had also been pocketing some of the fine money instead of depositing it into the HOA account. The amount was not huge, maybe $1,500 over 2 years, but it was still embezzlement. Donald reported it to the police, and Brenda ended up facing additional criminal charges for theft. In March, Brenda's criminal case went to court. Claire came with me for moral support. The proceedings were relatively brief. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that the vandalism was a heat-of-the-moment reaction to emotional distress, but the prosecutor pointed out that the spray painting occurred several days after the HOA board vote and was clearly premeditated retaliation. The judge was not sympathetic. Brenda was convicted on both vandalism charges and the embezzlement charge. She was sentenced to 60 days in jail, suspended pending completion of 1 year of probation, 120 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to both me and the HOA. The total restitution amount was over $5,000, including the cost of repairing my driveway, replacing my extension cord, a portion of my legal fees, and the money she had embezzled from the HOA. The civil lawsuit settled a few weeks later. Brenda's homeowner's insurance ended up covering most of the damages, and I received a check for $3,200, which more than covered all my expenses and hassles. Robert Chen's final bill came to just under $2,000, so I actually came out slightly ahead financially, though that had never been the point. The most satisfying part came in April when Brenda put her house up for sale. She could not handle living across the street from me after everything that had happened, and the neighborhood's opinion of her had turned completely toxic. No one spoke to her, and several homeowners had filed their own complaints about her previous actions now that she no longer had authority over them. Her house sold in May, and I watched from my window as the moving truck loaded up her belongings. She never looked at my house, never acknowledged me, just got in her car and drove away. I felt a sense of relief that I had not expected. It was finally, truly over. Donald Fraser turned out to be a decent HOA president. He implemented new rules requiring board approval for any fines over $50, mandatory appeals processes for homeowners who disagreed with violations, and term limits for board positions. The HOA also revised the bylaws to remove some of the more ridiculous rules, including the one about extension cords being visible from the street. As long as cords were safely installed and not creating hazards, they were now permitted. Claire and I got engaged in June. She had been supportive through the entire ordeal with Brenda, and the experience had actually brought us closer together. We started looking at houses together, and I considered selling my place in the HOA and moving to St. Paul to be closer to her work. But with Brenda gone and the HOA now functioning reasonably, I decided to stay. The house really was perfect for me, and the neighborhood was pleasant when it was not being run by a tyrant. We set a wedding date for the following October and started planning. My neighbors, many of whom had become friends during the battle against Brenda, were excited and supportive. Jim Rodriguez offered to host the rehearsal dinner, and Ashley Turner's kids made us a handmade congratulations card. In August, I ran into Donald at the grocery store. We chatted for a bit, and he mentioned that the HOA was doing well. Membership in community events was up, complaints were down, and several new families had moved into the neighborhood specifically because they had heard it was now well managed. "I owe you an apology," Donald said. "I should have stood up to Brenda a long time ago. I knew she was out of control, but I told myself it was easier to just let her do her thing and not rock the boat. I was wrong. You suffered because of my cowardice." "You made it right in the end," I said. "That's what matters. Still, I'm sorry. And thank you for not suing the HOA into oblivion. You would have had every right to." "I just wanted to live in my house in peace," I said. "I never wanted to become the guy who fought his HOA, but sometimes you have to stand up for yourself." "True enough," Donald agreed. "Hey, I heard congratulations are in order. You and Claire are getting married next October," I confirmed. "That's wonderful. You two are a great match. She seems like someone who does not take any nonsense from anyone." "You have no idea," I said with a smile. The rest of the year passed peacefully. I had no more HOA issues, no more drama, and no more Karen encounters. My truck's block heater worked perfectly through the following winter, protected by its new locking cover. The camera in my garage window stayed in place, just in case, but I never needed it for evidence again. Claire moved in with me in December, and we turned her apartment in St. Paul into a rental property. She got along great with the neighbors, and everyone loved her. She even joined the HOA board when Margaret Anderson stepped down, bringing her legal expertise and no-nonsense attitude to the role. Our wedding the following October was beautiful. We held it at a venue in downtown Minneapolis, with over 100 guests, including many of my neighbors from Maple Ridge. Donald gave a toast that jokingly referenced surviving HOA warfare together, and everyone laughed. Even Officer Stevens came as a guest. She had become friendly with Claire during the whole ordeal, and they had stayed in touch. As I stood there with Claire, surrounded by friends and neighbors, I reflected on how much had changed in the past year and a half. I had moved to Minnesota for a fresh start and a good job. I had not expected to end up in a war with my HOA president, but facing that challenge had taught me important lessons about standing up for myself, the value of documentation and legal support, and the importance of community. Brenda Patterson had tried to make my life miserable through petty enforcement of rules and outright vandalism. But in the end, her actions had backfired spectacularly. She had lost her position of authority, faced criminal charges, been forced to pay restitution, and ultimately fled the neighborhood in disgrace. Meanwhile, I had gained respect from my neighbors, helped reform the HOA into something functional, met my wife through the experience, and built a life in a community that now felt like home. The irony of the whole situation still made me smile sometimes. If Brenda had not cut my block heater cord that freezing January morning, none of this would have happened. Her car would not have failed to start. I would not have refused to help her. The neighborhood would not have rallied against her. The chain of events that led to her downfall all started with that one act of petty vandalism. There's a saying that pride comes before a fall. In Brenda's case, her pride and her need for control had led her to commit crimes, alienate an entire neighborhood, and ultimately lose everything she thought she had built. She had believed that being HOA president gave her the right to treat people however she wanted, and she had learned the hard way that authority without accountability is just tyranny, and tyranny never lasts. As for me, I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is to stand your ground, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. I could have just paid the fines and kept my head down. A lot of people would have. But doing that would have enabled Brenda to keep harassing not just me but everyone else in the neighborhood. By fighting back, documenting everything, and refusing to be intimidated, I had helped create positive change for an entire community. The block heater cord that Brenda cut had cost $60. The replacement cost about the same, but the principle behind fighting her actions had been priceless. Sometimes you have to spend money and time to defend what's right, and sometimes the battle is worth it not just for yourself, but for everyone else who comes after you. I still live in that house in Maple Ridge. Claire and I are happy there, and the HOA continues to function smoothly under reasonable leadership. We've installed a charging station for the electric vehicle we bought last year, properly permitted and approved by the HOA board without any issues. Our neighbors are friends, and the community events are actually enjoyable now. Sometimes on cold winter mornings, I look out my window at the spot where my truck is plugged in with its block heater running, protected by its locking cover, and monitored by my security camera. I think about that morning when Brenda Patterson stood there with bolt cutters, so convinced of her righteousness and authority. I think about how that single act of vandalism set in motion events that would cost her everything. And then I start my truck with the push of a button, the engine purring to life immediately thanks to the warm block heater, and I drive to work with a sense of satisfaction. Justice is not always swift, and it's not always perfect, but sometimes, when you stand up for yourself and refuse to back down, things work out exactly as they should. The story of HOA Karen who cut my block heater cord and then needed help with her own car became legendary in our neighborhood. New residents hear about it during their orientation. It serves as both a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and a reminder that communities work best when authority is exercised reasonably and with accountability. The bylaws that were changed as a result of that conflict still protect homeowners from arbitrary enforcement and abuse of power. In the end, the cold Minnesota winter that Brenda had tried to weaponize against me became the instrument of her own downfall. Her car would not start because she had not prepared for the cold, and my refusal to help her was the catalyst that exposed her pattern of abuse to the entire community. The weather that morning had been negative 15 degrees, cold enough to be dangerous, cold enough to kill car batteries and freeze engine blocks. But it had also been cold enough to freeze Brenda Patterson out of the position of power she had abused for so long. And on that cold January morning, standing in my driveway looking at my severed extension cord, I had made a choice that changed everything. I chose not to be a victim. I chose to fight back. I chose to document everything, seek legal help, and refuse to be intimidated. That choice made all the difference, not just for me, but for everyone in Maple Ridge who had suffered under Brenda's tyranny. Sometimes one person standing up is all it takes to create change. Sometimes refusing to accept unfair treatment is the catalyst that brings down a tyrant. And sometimes justice really does prevail. My block heater works perfectly now. My truck starts every morning no matter how cold it gets. And across the street, where Brenda Patterson used to live, there's a nice family with 2 kids who actually follow reasonable rules, treat their neighbors with respect, and would never dream of cutting someone's extension cord with bolt cutters at 5:30 in the morning. Life is good in Maple Ridge these days. The HOA functions as it should, maintaining property values and organizing community events without harassment or petty enforcement. Donald Fraser proved to be exactly the kind of leader the neighborhood needed, and when his term ended, he was replaced by another reasonable person who continues that tradition. Claire and I are expecting our first child this spring. We've already started planning how to baby-proof the house, and several neighbors have offered to lend us equipment and advice. This is what community is supposed to be: people helping each other, looking out for one another, and creating a place where everyone feels safe and welcome. It's a far cry from the community Brenda Patterson tried to create, one based on fear, intimidation, and rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules. Her vision of leadership was one where she had power and everyone else had to fall in line. But that's not leadership, that's dictatorship. Real leadership is about serving the community, listening to concerns, and exercising authority with wisdom and restraint. The lessons I learned from fighting Brenda and the HOA have served me well in other areas of my life too. I'm more confident in standing up for myself at work, more willing to question authority when it seems unreasonable, and more aware of the importance of documentation and legal protections. I've also become more active in my community, attending HOA meetings regularly and serving on the Architectural Review Committee. Claire jokes that Brenda Patterson inadvertently did us a favor by being so terrible. If the HOA had been run reasonably from the start, I might never have paid much attention to how it operated. I would have just lived my life and ignored the neighborhood politics. But because Brenda forced me to engage, I became invested in making sure the HOA functioned properly. I became part of the solution instead of just a passive resident. There's truth to that. Sometimes adversity forces us to become better versions of ourselves. Sometimes challenges reveal strengths we did not know we had. And sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes, not because of the experience itself, but because of how we choose to respond to it. So while I would not wish the stress and expense of fighting an HOA Karen on anyone, I also would not trade the experience for anything. It taught me valuable lessons, brought positive change to my community, and ultimately led to me building a life here that I love. It connected me with neighbors who became friends, with a legal system that worked as it should, and with my future wife who stood by me through the whole ordeal. And every cold winter morning, when I plug in my block heater, and know that my truck will start reliably no matter how low the temperature drops. I think about Brenda Patterson standing in her cold car, trying desperately to start the engine, and asking me for help that I chose not to provide. Some might call that petty. Some might say I should have been the bigger person and helped anyway, but I call it justice. I call it consequences. I call it the natural result of treating people badly and expecting them to still be there for you when you need help. Brenda Patterson had spent 8 months making my life difficult over trivial matters. She had destroyed my property out of spite and bureaucratic zealotry. And when she faced the consequences of her own poor planning and her own failure to prepare for winter weather, she discovered that actions have consequences and burned bridges cannot be uncrossed. The block heater cord she cut cost $60 and took 5 minutes to replace. But the lesson she learned about respect, authority, and consequences was priceless. I just wish she had learned it sooner, before she had made so many people miserable, and before she had committed crimes that resulted in a criminal record. But some people have to learn the hard way. As for me, I'm warm, my truck starts perfectly, my HOA is functional, my neighbors are friends, my wife is amazing, and my future looks bright. The Karen who tried to make my life miserable is gone, facing probation and a criminal record. Justice was served, lessons were learned, and life goes on in the best possible way. And that, ultimately, is the real victory.